Run it like.
Property binding is same as interpolation, which is used for one-way data binding, which is basically from component to the view template. Now in property binding, we basically bind to the HTML attribute values, which allows you to modify the behavior and appearance of those HTML elements. Now interpolation is easy to use in your code, but for the cases where you want to show or hide certain HTML element in your code, or for those cases where non-string value is coming from the component to the view side, then you will prefer property binding over the interpolation. There are a couple of ways in which we can use property binding. So in the first part, if you see, we are using interpolation over here, which will be ideal case for scenarios where you are attaching string values. But for those cases where we don't have string values, it is recommended to use the second and the third option, where in the second option you wrap the HTML attribute with the brackets, and in the third part where we use a canonical form to prefix the HTML attribute tag with a canonical form called bind with a hyphen, and then over here this is the variable defined in the component side. Now let's go into the demo and see how we can use property binding with all these three different ways, and also how we can control the visibility of an element using the property binding, and when to use interpolation and when to use property binding. So switching back VS Code editor, I have already written the code over here so that I don't waste much of your time. Now in the first part of the code, if you see over here, I have used interpolation. The second part, I have used brackets to cover up the HTML attribute. And in the third part, which is the canonical part, I am using the word bind hyphen prefixing the HTML attribute. Now in both the parts, both the three options, the result is same. Now consider the case when some of the portion is hard coded over here and some portion is coming from the code behind, or which is coming from the component. So in interpolation, it is easy to do. So for example, we can add some things like this one. So here half of the portion is part of your view template and half of the dynamic portion is coming from the code behind. But in this case, when you have two set of strings, concatenating is not easy on, or not possible directly on the property binding these syntaxes. So for those kind of cases, I would prefer to use interpolation as part of the property binding, which is this syntax. Now the other thing is that we use property binding when we are trying to hide or show some HTML element. For example, in this case, if we have a button and you have a disabled property over here in the code behind. So if I go back and show you, I have a disabled property which is of type boolean. It is not of type string. So when it is not of type string, then you cannot use interpolation. I will show you why. Because interpolation always take it as a string. So disabled property is of type boolean. So when it is of type boolean, which is I have set it to as false, so it is not disabled. So if you go back to your HTML over here, I am using the hyphen syntax right now and the canonical one, and I am putting a disabled value that is coming from the component. After running the code, you see that it is not disabled right now because the disabled property is false. Now if I go back and set it to true, then what will happen is it will get disabled, so that it is disabled now. So for those kind of scenarios, so where you are dynamically changing the appearance of your HTML attribute, I would prefer to use property binding like this. Now what if I use interpolation over here instead of this property binding method? So if I use interpolation, what I will do is I will remove this one from here. I will have this disabled like this, and this value coming from the component, I will wrap it up with two curly braces. Now if I go back and I turn it to false, means it is not disabled. Okay, so when I turn it to both of the two which are done using property binding becomes false, but the one using interpolation is still not getting enabled. The reason being is that this is considered as string, it is not getting considered as boolean. So that's the why there is no impact of using the property binding over here. So that's the difference between interpolation and property binding. I hope you would have liked this video. Do let us know what you liked about this video by providing your comments and feedback in the comment section below. Also, do remember to like and subscribe our channel Help Me Coder. Keep on watching. Happy coding.